Alright guys, I thought I'd bring you this video real quick. See how this lady knows the truth. Alright? Listen to her.
That said, we are not, essentially I held a sign that said, we are not living in a rape culture in the West. Which we are not. It is intellectually dishonest to think that we are living in a rape culture. Rapes do happen, but the minority, the vast minority of men and women are rapists. And when we do find out they're rapists,
they go to jail.
They go to prison, they are punished. Whereas in the third world countries and other places, men can get away with rape there.
No means no! No means no! No means no!
You are attacking our cameraman! Yeah.
He was the one who touched me first!
Excuse me.
Oh, come on.
So you went to the slut walk, which for those who don't know, began around 4 years ago off the back of a comment made by a Toronto police officer who basically said that women would be less likely to be raped if they didn't dress like sluts. It's become a huge thing, numerous cities across the world. I think it was best summed up by an NRO article which I read, which called it a legitimate grievance that empowers a movement of irrational hatred. And as he said, it's this idea that men have to be reminded every day not to be rapists. And, you know, how is a costume party, which is essentially what this has become, disguised as a protest, how is that going to stop actual rapists who aren't even going to pay attention to any of this? How is it going to deter actual rapists? Because it's, you know, in the long run, it's only going to harm gender relations by making men petrified of intimacy and making women petrified of men. So you go there to basically challenge this entire narrative. You hold up the
Now this is a
saying
smart
there's no
girl.
rape culture in the West. Tell us what happened after that.
Well, I just walked up there silently and held my sign, and I've been to events before that have been protested by people who disagree, and at the events I've been to, usually there are a few people that disagree with signs, and they'll stand there, sometimes they'll yell everything, so I figured it wouldn't be that big of a deal, actually, if I went there and held the sign. I wasn't sure how they would react. But what happened eventually was a lot of the participants and girls that were there, it was mostly females, obviously, they came up the steps and started trying to hide my sign with their signs. And when I'd move to one side of the steps, they would walk over that way and hold up their sign trying to hide me, and they were yelling at the media, telling them not to pay attention to me. And eventually they started actually talking to me and yelling at me, and we got into a bit of argument. One girl threatened to punch me. My sign was eventually torn up, the sign that said there is no rape culture in the West. And everyone who I talked to after that was pretty angry and malicious towards me. In fact, after they found out that I did not agree with the narrative of the walk, they tried to withdraw their consent of footage that I had taken and interviews I had done, comparing me filming them and not getting rid of the footage after to rape.
There's a group of women that were here, and they're wishing to withdraw consent to use the footage that you had, I guess, gotten. So can you please make sure that is done? And
No.
make sure that any of the stuff that they have.
We may or we may not use the footage. It is a public area, so we do have legal rights to use the footage.
But you interviewed them specifically, right? So
Yes, and they gave us consent to interview
well,
them.
now they're withdrawing it. So
That's not how it works, but
which is interesting given the event that you're at, right? That's a little bit contradictory.
I mean, it's a little bit contradictory. Well, I totally say that's not how it works.
Well,
You can't just withdraw consent the next,
well, that's interesting.
why is that interesting? No, tell me
Like a rally for rapists, consent and withdrawing consent, saying no means no. They're saying no, and you're saying that
Okay, so if someone gives consent the night before, and then they have, listen, if they have sex with a man and they give consent to him, then the next day decide, oh, I regret it. I'm going to report him for being a rapist, even though I gave him consent.
And that's what they do.
That's okay?
So you're sounding a little bit like a 12-year-old because this is irrelevant.
One of them
See, they're so
challenging
stupid.
you on your statistics, which is pretty ironic given that this entire movement is based around this complete baloney. that 1 in
It's
5
bullshit.
college women are
There
raped.
is not a rape
And
culture,
college
you
women are
morons.
less likely than women in the normal population.
It's women that don't have nothing better to do.
That was based on are drawn out of CDC head counts where they count people who've had consensual sex who are high on drugs or drunk
Yeah.
as rape. So it's completely misleading. It has been for years, yet they're still parroting it. You had somebody challenge you on your statistics. She said, you know, what about the vast majority of rape cases that are not reported? Just tell us how you responded to that individual in particular.
Well, I responded by saying that in Canada, every 100,000 people, there's only 1.7 individuals who actually report rape, which I think is relevant to the rape culture discussion. And she began talking about rapes that weren't reported, and she stated that there are 10%, only 10% of rapes are reported. And I find those stats of how many are and aren't reported, first of all, none of them are actually, we don't know whether they happened or not, because there wasn't an investigation that went into them. They could have been false claims. It's just there's so much up in the air with those stats and studies, and I looked into it a bit after, and even RAIN, which is obviously a more biased place to get statistics, puts that number at 36%. So I have no idea where she got her 10% statistic. I think she just pulled it out of her ass, to be honest, despite her calling me a pseudo reporter and all my pseudo statistics and everything. Honestly, I have so much trouble believing feminists or radical leftists when they present me with statistics, especially on topics of rape, sexual assault, and gender pay gap, all of these, because every time I look into them, there is something missing. Every time I look into them, there is something off, something that has been skewed to portray a certain narrative. Like you said, the 1 in 5 study has been looked into and debunked so many times, yet they keep perpetuating it. That's why I find it funny that she brought up statistics, like you were saying, because they don't care to look into the statistics and see if they're real. They've got an agenda, and they're going to scream and shout and run around in bikinis all day until people start treating them like victims and give them special treatment.
That's what they want.
Entitlement.
And there was another one on there who said that these YouTube videos about this guy who hijacks live news broadcasts and says, you know, F her right in the pussy, was an example of rape culture, when that is a known hoax. Everybody knows that that's a hoax, yet she cited that as an example of rape culture.
Do you actually think we live in a rape culture?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think so. I was actually just chatting with my friend about even, you know, the viral craze going on where people come up to reporters such as yourself and are saying that awful phrase to the live cameras, that's F her right in the P, and that kind of language that is considered funny is something that, you know, it might seem like an innocent thing at the time, but it's just an example of how the language we use is absolutely involved with rape culture.
It might be offensive.
Stupid women.
Unpleasant.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's an example of rape culture.
Even if it was happening all the time, constantly, and it was happening to every reporter ever, that would not be a rape culture. That's still an exaggeration. Comparing having names called at you or having offensive things yelled at you to being brutally raped, it's so wrong in my opinion.
And it denigrates actual rape victims. Of course, real rape victims in real rape cultures, which feminists don't like to talk about because sometimes it's not politically correct. Examples being in Rotherham, where we had white girls being abused by Pakistani rape gangs and the police covering it up and protecting them, or in countries like Denmark and Sweden, where the majority of violent rapists are foreign-born immigrants. They don't really like to talk about that, do they? Because they can't blame it on the evil white Western male patriarchy.
Exactly, and especially also, it can be offensive to question other cultures, which is, I think, what you were probably getting at. And it's fascinating too, because this does absolutely nothing for even rape victims here. I don't think it represents women who have been brutally raped here, or at least a lot of them, especially women and men who took precautions. Now, I'm not saying I support victim blaming or saying that it's someone's fault if they get super drunk and have sex, or it's someone's fault if they dress inappropriately and get raped, but I am adamantly against standing it and speaking up against taking precautions, because what about all of the women who took precautions, who were just walking home from work, running around in bikinis and saying, don't blame me for being drunk, doesn't represent those people. It doesn't represent the women who were raped when they took precautions. in my opinion, yeah.
And of course, the major cases that come out, that arise out of this so-called rape culture, like the UVA rape hoax, Mattress Girl, and others, they always completely collapse. And in fact, it ruins the lives of the people that are falsely accused. So those are the great fruits that have been born from this aggressive promotion of rape culture. But you post the video of this, it goes viral, it got over 700,000 views last time I looked, probably more by now. Then there's this online hate campaign basically launched against you. There's a petition. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so they started a petition, and even before the petition was released to have me removed as a libertarian candidate, they had sent letters just filled with lies and slander about me to friends of mine, to every single member of the Libertarian Party, to just everyone I knew. Like, I don't know if they looked at my Facebook friends list or if they can even see that, but they managed to just get this slander out, and I had so many people coming up to me and asking me, hey, were you screaming at rape victims and telling them that the rapes didn't happen? And they're like, no, that didn't happen. And one of the letters I got, in fact, it was this huge, just crazy letter that was sent to me as well, about how this girl talks about how she feels like a mama lioness protecting all the feminists from the evil wolf, which was me just absolutely insane, and talks about how she was so triggered she starts puking all night, and I just like the most insane letters you've ever seen. And then they wrote a huge petition to get signed to get me kicked out of the party, and eventually I took the extra footage that I had from the event, and I showed that I stood there silently at the beginning. I don't know if you saw my video, what really happened at the slut walk, and I showed that I stood there silently, and all their claims were debunked essentially, and they still continue to say that I spliced the footage and I somehow edited the footage to make it seem like I didn't yell at rape victims and tell them to check their privilege. So, I don't know, it's just insane. I don't understand how they can lie so blatantly, and I really don't think being
They do, though.
An assaulted, a raped woman really does them well to go around lying about people. It really doesn't help, especially when there have been so many false reporting about rape, because if they're going around and lying and slandering people, it just makes it that much more difficult to believe.
I'm gonna cut it short here, guys, but that feminists, they're liars, guys. And the rape culture, it's a bunch of lies. You know what I mean? They won't say nothing about those Pakistanis or other races raping them, but they'll blame the white guy. How stupid they are. Later.